Today on CityCast Chicago. Last month, the city of Chicago filed a lawsuit against gun manufacturer Glock, arguing the company has done little to nothing to prevent individuals from modifying their popular handguns into essentially automatic weapons. Now, this attempt to hold corporations accountable for the ongoing illegal gun trade is not a new strategy, however. 25 years ago, the mayor of Gary, Indiana, filed a similar suit against some of the country's biggest gun manufacturers, and it remains in legal limbo to this day. We look at how Gary's case has endured and what Chicago can learn as it pursues this uphill battle. It's Monday, April 8th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. ProPublica reporter with their Midwest newsroom, Vernal Coleman, has been following a historic lawsuit out of Gary, Indiana. Historic both in its attempt to hold gun manufacturers accountable for the illegal gun trade, but also historic because it's been around for 25 years. Vernal, a new state law out of Indiana may be the final nail in the coffin for this lawsuit. We appreciate you being here at CityCast Chicago to break it all down.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I mean, I feel like we maybe need to set a baseline for people to first understand how gun laws may differ in Indiana than Illinois. You know, we don't need to kind of go through all of the details, but maybe at face value, what are some of the major differences?
Well, the most significant difference between a person's ability to buy a gun, say here in the city of Chicago, and a person's ability to buy a gun just over the border 30 minutes in Gary, is that you can't buy a gun in Chicago. There are no gun retailers in Chicago. You can buy one from a private seller, but not in the actual city from a licensed dealer. And that's really what's at issue here. So someone would have to go outside of the city in, say, other parts of Cook County. And certainly the state of Indiana, it's just easier to get one.
Just in terms of political tension that creates, what does the relationship between, say, a Gary and a Chicago look like, maybe from a mayoral perspective, given that in Chicago, often you hear things like, oh, it's hard to fight illegal guns when people can just bring them in from over in Indiana. There's very much the nation sort of victimizes Chicago, and then Chicago is like, well, we got to blame somebody, and then we blame Indiana or Gary.
Oh, I think, well, in terms of blame, I think there's a lot of, just based on the political back and forth the last like 15 to 20 years, there's been a lot of, maybe I wouldn't say cooperation, but certainly a lot of shared frustration. I think Gary's mayors have often been in the same position as City of Chicago's mayors. They've often been sort of rowing in the same direction in terms of trying to find some sort of remedy through the courts to solve this problem of gun violence. And, you know, it's not necessarily that I think that they are working together. They haven't formed any and filed any lawsuits together in court or anything like that. But
they're facing the same headwind.
They are facing the same headwind. They're facing the same challenges.
So you bring up this lawsuit and you know, one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because this historic lawsuit out of Gary, Indiana, was this major attempt alongside, as you mentioned, so many other cities to try to hold gun manufacturers accountable. And this is 25 years ago. Can you take us back to the 90s? How did this particular lawsuit come to be?
Well, the city of Gary's lawsuit was really, this was back in the 90s when certainly Gary, Chicago, and other cities were facing an epidemic of gun violence. This was in the height of the drug wars and gang wars at that time. But in Gary's specific case, and some others, I think the city of Chicago did this as well. They were looking for remedies and decided, well, how can we combat this problem? There's not just guns that could be available, rather that could be purchased on the street illegally, but we also have these guns that are being used in crimes that are, you know, the source of them are these retailers, and we know are being sold illegally, at least from the standpoint of the folks that are going in to buy them, not being able to or selling them on the street to people who should not have them. So they decided to send some undercover police officers out, fan them out across the area, and conducted undercover stings. And there's surveillance video that we were able to obtain from those stings that showed, just as described, that retailers in some cases were essentially ignoring various different federal restrictions that prevent
Mm-hmm.
people from purchasing guns on behalf of somebody else. These proxy sales, these straw sales that are illegal and that many people end up getting indicted for at the federal level. So that formed really the basis of the lawsuit.
That was the show don't tell part of the thing. They was like, if you're not going to
Exactly.
listen to us, we're going to send folks in.
Exactly.
Like, given how other cities at the time were pursuing the evidence and basis for their lawsuits, how unique was this thing comparatively, and how, just how bad did it make the retailers, particularly in Indiana, look at that time?
I don't know how shocking it was, or rather how unique it was, because, the city of Chicago also conducted its own undercover stings. So I think
Oh,
everybody at the time was aware that this was happening. And again, even back then in the late 1990s, it was very much an established understanding that many of the guns that were being found on the streets of Chicago, and using the Commission of Crimes in Gary as well, were not coming from those places. And even when you talk to law enforcement, it's been sort of the dynamic has been for a long time. It's just the guns that end up in the place are a lot of times purchased where it's just easy to buy them.
one thing your reporting makes very clear is that this lawsuit sat alongside dozens that over the last 20 plus years have just sort of gotten clipped over and over and over. What has been so significant about this lawsuit that has allowed it to in some ways sort of stick around, lag around, languish for 20 plus years?
Well, there's a lot to go into to unpack there. It's like
I can see how much work you've done on your face. Like, you look up and you can just see all of the books and the articles and the interviews.
Yeah, it's 25 years worth of court documents to read through. So, it's a lot to take in. But part of the reason that it's survived, one, is because it's been able to, I think, hit a very narrow target that some of the other lawsuits just simply have not. In the state of Indiana, there is a public nuisance law that the city of Gary at least was able to prove in court. Like, there's enough here to at least see if there's a public nuisance. And this was after years and years of back and forth and challenges from the gun industry, the defendants in the case, manufacturers, retailers, etc. And others, have failed because there's just been a lot of pushback from the industry. One of the big reasons back in, I believe it was 2005, that there was federal legislation at the federal level in direct response to all of these lawsuits being filed back in the late 90s, that gave near blanket protections to the gun industry in terms of facing lawsuit for things like straw sales. Some of them did proceed, but I don't know if there's one that proceeded to the extent that the Gary case did. They never got as far as the Gary case did in terms of just like discovery, though it took the Gary 25 years to do it.
I was going to say there was a crucial moment back in, I think, 2021 when a judge ordered thousands of pages of internal documents to be turned over for discovery to the Gary attorney, something they've been trying to get for years. Did that give them any momentum at the time?
I think that basically was the alarm for the defendants in the case, who certainly did not want to disclose those documents, any internal documents. That can't say whether or not they would have proven what the city of Gary might have hoped they might prove, but certainly didn't want to give anything up. And, they provided various different reasons for that. But point being that was a significant moment. And what you saw almost, I guess I wouldn't say immediately afterward, but if you look at the timeline, that court order happens, and then you see a ramp up from the industry as far as lobbying is concerned at the General Assembly. And then this, as a result, or rather from that, you get this legislation from the General Assembly, essentially directly targeted at the Gary case.
Mm-hmm. It basically says who can and cannot sue these manufacturers.
It does. In fact, it says, it's very specific. It essentially only gives the power to sue gun manufacturers, really anyone in the firearms industry, to the state attorney general.
Do we have precedent across other industries, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, where a state can sort of take this move to say, hey, the only people who can sort of take them to court is us. Is there any other industry that has this type of, I don't know, at least from my perspective, it looks like leeway, which is not to say the state does not have resources if it wants to take someone to trial, to sort of to pursue that to their full ability. But in this case, it feels more collusion or sort of protective than it does, hey, let the big guns handle it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that there are other industries that enjoy this level of protection, but the oldest folks that I've spoken to say that, in terms of protections for particular industry, the nation's sort of like a patchwork. But I do know that there's definitely in other states specific preemptions that favor the firearms industry. So, it's just a matter of what, I guess, where the wind blows politically.
This episode is brought to you by ShipStation. If you run an e-commerce business, you know how much work it takes to produce something great while dealing with complicated shipping issues. That's why over 130,000 companies have turned to ShipStation, an innovative tool that allows you to focus less on shipping and more on building your brand. With ShipStation, you can manage orders, label printing, reporting, and customer service on one easy-to-use dashboard. You'll reduce warehouse costs with reliable enterprise solutions and save thousands on shipping costs with discounts up to 89% off. Plus, you can effortlessly import orders from everywhere you sell online. So, turn your shipping challenges into opportunities for growth. Go to ShipStation.com and use code POD to sign up for your free 60-day trial. That's ShipStation.com, code POD.
These companies have been able to hold on for decades fighting this litigation. I mean, how much hope are we to take away when we've seen over 20 years, dozens upon dozens of states fail, and even the lawsuit that's held on the longest, not only be potentially defeated by a state law, but just knowing that these industries have so much power and money that 20, 25 years to us seems like a lifetime, but to them it's like water in the bucket.
I mean, I think one of the things I think about when, just reporting the story is the look of, I don't know if I call it dread, but certainly look of disappointment, that I saw on the faces of the folks who have worked on, this case, even for just their small portion of it for say 4 to 5 years. This is a case that's now 25 years old. I mean, that's a quarter of a century. That's a generation worth of work into this
People have had kids, sent them off to college, and then gone to their graduation in this time.
Just chatting with the mayor of Gary,
Eddie
Melton, was in high school was a senior in high school when this case was actually filed back in 1999. So a lot of time has passed. A lot of work has been put in. So this is a significant setback. And, I do think it does sort of speak to, the power of the firearms industry and the power of the gun lobby in this country. I mean, it's exactly what you said, it's sue us. They do have a lot of resources, and they can and have certainly successfully been able to hold off this case and others over the course of the last 25 years. It's well-resourced, and by that I mean they have a lot of money to spend on attorneys' fees and research and everything, and so they can wait a case like this out, and it doesn't necessarily affect their bottom line.
Yeah. We've talked so much during this conversation about the illegal gun trade in the 25 years. Let's just take a Gary and a Chicago. How illegal guns flow from Indiana into this city. Has that changed in 25 years? Like, what does that look like now in 2024?
I haven't seen the most current numbers, but I would hazard to say that it's the same.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of that process, is it simply people going into retailers, buying a bunch and then simply taking them and selling them elsewhere? Like even that process, has it gotten more complicated for people who want to do these illegal sales, given how just, the lawsuits aren't effective, but aren't people thinking about it more, paying attention to it more, looking for it more?
Biden administration has recently tightened up restrictions and certainly I think enhanced penalties for retailers that are the site of straw sales. So we'll see if that actually does affect, I guess the illegal gun trade. But just generally, no, nothing has really changed.
The whole time I was asking, you was like, it's a very smart question. And you would think,
nah,
bro, nah.
No, not really. I mean, I'm sure that there have been some restrictions, some attempts to, make it harder for people to, purchase guns illegally. But if you look at the indictments that come down, which is where we get a lot of this information, it's the same process as it was 20 years ago. It is simply a matter of, Kobe, if I'm a felon or if I'm otherwise barred by federal law or any other restriction from buying a gun, if you have a clean record, I ask you, I say, hey, I'm going to flip you a couple of dollars to go in to this retailer over here in Indiana, buy me a couple of guns. And then I'm going to ask you to do that again at the retailer down the block. And then a couple of miles up the road, I'm going to ask you to do that again. We might spend $5,000, et cetera. That's the process. That's what it's always been. And I don't know that has slowed or changed fundamentally at all.
And the risk for that person going in, putting their name down on paperwork here, and here.
You can go to jail. So in that scenario, you can definitely go to jail. And I do think, one of the counters to all of this, from the folks that are certainly supporters of the legislation that upended the Gary case, was that this should be handled from the law enforcement side. And, there's some merit to that. But, the bottom line is like, it just all depends on what the priorities are for any particular law enforcement agency. Sometimes, and the people have told me this, that sometimes these cases are considered low level.
They only care once the gun is used, how the gun sort of gets to where it is, which is so clearly a part of the danger and a part of the process that allows for sort of violence to spiral. But they're like, let's wait till the gun gets to where it's going to do its most amount of violence.
And that's the part that is the hardest to police. And once they get there, a lot of the folks, honestly, a lot of the folks who are involved in this, it may be just as simple as, I'm going to do this for my cousin. I'm going to do this for my friend, or, I'm going to do this just because it's easy money. And I'm not sure to the extent that they are thinking of the consequences, because, it seems to me that sometimes this may be, at least for some people, a victimless crime. And they are surprised that, if something truly, truly terrible results from it. And oftentimes, folks will get, I don't know if I call it light sentences, because there's no light sentence in federal prison, but they'll get probation and time served. The heavy sentences are generally reserved for people who are really trafficking. But it doesn't necessarily, all it takes is one. You can buy just one gun, and that gun can be used if you flip it after it makes it to wherever.
All right. I've seen a report of someone tracking the lifespan of a gun that had,
exactly
a few bodies on it across a few different circumstances.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation to this point, and a part of me wants to sort of keep hope, because like you said, states and cities are still trying to find that lawsuit that will encourage others to pursue lawsuit that might set a precedent moving forward for increased protections. And last month, the city of Chicago filed a lawsuit against gun manufacturer Glock, arguing the company has done little to nothing to prevent individuals from modifying their popular handguns into essentially automatic weapons with the purchase of a cheap device most folks listening might know as a switch. Vernal, I'm not asking you to play Oracle, but is this one of those lawsuits that has the potential to set that type of precedent, or based on what you've seen so far, it's just another one of those attempts that may get rebuffed in litigation?
That's really hard to say, not being an attorney, but based on what I can say with some clarity is that it's going to be a long road for the city of Chicago as pursuing this. This is going to be challenged, just like all of them are challenged by the industry. And we'll see what kind of stomach the city has for moving this forward. I mean, clearly they brought this lawsuit. They are motivated, but this is, if the situation with the city of Gary's lawsuit is any indication, a lesson, they need to be in it for the long haul, because this could take some
high school senior listening to this right now going to be fighting this mug in 25 years.
Could be. So, so we shall see is, the only answer I think I can offer there.
So what do you think ultimately will be the legacy of this lawsuit and fight? Did we learn anything? Develop new legal strategies for going against gun lobbyists and manufacturers? What will be the legacy of this particular case?
I think at least for the folks on the city side of this equation, this, political and, social question, there's insight to be gained even in a loss. And it is not, I should clarify, it's not over until a judge actually dismisses the case, and they may even appeal it. But this is probably going to make it harder for them to thread that needle. Mm-hmm. And so they will have to come up with some sort of legal strategy that essentially allows them to say that, this law that was recently passed by the state legislature is somehow unconstitutional. Whether or not the courts actually buy that, I'm not sure. So that may present a way forward for them. So we'll see what happens. I know that just speaking with some Gary residents, they weren't even aware that this stuff was going on. And some of them have been affected by violence in Gary. So, there's a trickle down effect that what happens at those levels can happen in the dark and can directly affect people's lives. So just stay aware.
I want to give a huge thank you to Vernal Coleman, who is a reporter with ProPublica's Midwest Newsroom. Thank you so much for being here to break this down with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we let you go, for more news and events, head over to our website, chicago.citycast.fm. While you're there, you can check out our best food and drink list, neighborhood guides, and sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. Now, whether it's Monday or Friday, I'm going to end every episode with some good news. It's a busy week for art fairs in the city. Not only is Expo Chicago this week, but also the other art fair kicks off Thursday at Artifact Events in Ravenswood. You can check the show notes for more info on the 4-day event, but my favorite part is no doubt the art swap. Basically, show up with an original artwork you made or own, spin the swap wheel, and you're gonna leave out with another great piece. As always, we appreciate you for listening. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.